Brought many animals back from the brink of extinction and millions of tourist dollars from all over the world. But as Bob Simon first reported last year, there's a problem lurking in the South African bush. Game rangers discovered that a new group of juvenile delinquents has been attacking and killing the white rhino. The rhino they've spent years protecting.
This is a mission to save the rhinos in South Africa's Pilanesberg Park. Rhinos who were thriving until an unknown killer began stalking them. A tranquilizer dart brings the animal down.
Yeah, he has got a dart.
The rhino is tagged to make it easier to identify.
Just about to insert a microchip into the shoulder.
The rangers have to count these animals to protect them. 10% of the rhino population was being wiped out, 39 during the killing spree. Dead rhinos started turning up all over the park, and it clearly wasn't the work of poachers. The rhinos' horns hadn't been touched. The park rangers soon found themselves cast as cops conducting an investigation, and their first findings led them to believe that if they were to round up the usual suspects, they'd need a pretty large holding pen. That's because this is one of the prime suspects, a killer caught on home video terrorizing a group of tourists. It turned out that young male elephants were behind the murders of Pilanesberg's rhinos.
Many of the carcasses were decomposed at first, and the indications were there that it was elephants.
Gus Van Dyke is Pilanesberg Park's field ecologist.
I must be honest, I really was skeptical at first.
Because you didn't want to believe it?
Yeah, you don't want to believe that an elephant is capable of killing a rhino.
Why would they do it? Well, like juvenile delinquents from urban jungles, they'd grown up without role models.
What's different is they don't have a father.
Everyone needs a dad.
I think everyone needs a role model. And these elephants that left the herd had no role model and no idea of what appropriate elephant behavior was.
The problem goes back 20 years to Kruger National Park, South Africa's largest. Kruger simply had too many elephants. In those days, there was no way to relocate these large adults, so a tough decision was made. Kill the adults, save the children, who were easy to transport to other parks.
I think it was a good idea.
Dr. Haim Ebedes was the government veterinarian who approved the relocations back then.
Did it occur to you at the time that you were proposing this notion that moving young elephants without their parents could be problematic?
I did think about that, but there was at that particular time, there was no other option.
The intentions may have been good, but the program created a whole generation of traumatized orphans thrown together without any adults to calm them down or teach them how to behave. Years later, those lonely orphans developed into troubled teenagers. That's when the killings at Pilanesberg Park began. Like a police department facing a crime wave, the rangers photographed the murder scenes and put together rap sheets on the prime suspects, giving them each names.
And here's Tom Thumb. We've identified that Tom Thumb was in an area, coincidentally, where a rhino mortality took place.
Sounds to me like circumstantial evidence at best.
That's right.
Tom Thumb was under surveillance, but other elephants were caught red-handed.
That would be a typical rap sheet. It's just a date and a short description of what the animal was involved in.
April 26, 96, chasing white rhino. 4th of April, white rhino mortality. Aggressive interaction with tourist vehicle. This guy was building up quite a record, huh?
It was eventually decided on, at the end of that rap sheet, to kill this elephant.
5 were killed in all. They may have been juvenile delinquents, but there's no reform school for elephants. When a gate-crashing teenager attacked Jock McMillan's place, however, Jock decided to take him on. This home video shows Jock face-to-face with an elephant who's just smashed through his fence and threatened a group of workers. Jock defended his turf the way an elephant would and pushed the troublemaker back out. Macmillan is the elephant man at a private game reserve, and this elephant, a bull named Mafuta, was his biggest problem. Jock didn't want to shoot the elephant. His only hope was to provide supervision and discipline himself. Mafuta was your typical 14-year-old schoolyard bully, picking on rhinos by throwing sticks and stones. But get up close,
Yeah, it's asshole, man.
and you realize how big a juvenile delinquent is when it's an elephant. And those sticks are actually big branches.
That's enough of that.
The problem was even larger than Mafuta himself. He turned the reserve's elephant herd, all orphans relocated without adults, into a street gang. And he was the gang leader. Here he is sparring with one of his pals.
The source of the problem was basically human beings doing something which turned out to be wrong. On that basis, we're pretty much obliged to try and solve the problem before taking the drastic steps of shooting the animals.
At that point, it seemed there was still time to study the situation, that a real confrontation was several years away.
Now, the elephants here are still relatively small, and therefore aren't really in a position to do much damage to a rhino. What's going to happen as the elephants get bigger?
I can only assume that the same would happen as it happened in Pilanesberg.
So you're anticipating the same problems?
If we do nothing about it, yes, absolutely.
Jock followed the elephants night and day to document the rhino attacks. At first, the scene seemed funny enough. Mafuta hosing down a rhino with his trunk. But the attacks became more violent. At one point, Mafuta spent 7 hours stubbornly going after a group of rhinos. When Jock briefly managed to distract the elephant, the rhinos ran for cover. But when Mafuta saw what had happened, he charged off in a rage. Several weeks later, he attacked one of the same rhinos again.
This time he actually got on top of her, pushed her down, knelt on her, went round the back and kicked her.
After another violent attack, time had run out for Jock and for Mafuta. Mafuta had to be shot. First, a vet fires a tranquilizer dart. Mafuta stumbles and goes down. The other elephants trumpet and circle around to protect him. The rangers, unable to go in for the final kill, call in a helicopter to drive the other elephants off. But one just can't leave, Mafuta's younger sister. 3 times she races away to the cover of a thicket, then comes back to try and rouse her brother. Finally, with the chopper hovering low, she has to leave him behind. She seems to know what will happen next.
I realized it had to be done, but because I've been working rather closely with the animal, you form emotional attachments.
The people at Pilanesberg had emotional attachments too. Like Jock, they didn't want to kill their delinquents. They wanted to understand them.
The rangers were baffled by the behavior of these young male elephants. It was strange. It was unprecedented. But then a pattern began to emerge, and the reason behind the delinquency became clear. Clear, that is, to the parents of any teenage boy who's just started to shave. The elephants who were picking on the rhinos were all suffering from an excess of testosterone. And the solution turned out to be the biggest Big Brother program in the world.
The rangers went looking for big daddies, role models to keep the youngsters from mating at an early age when they can't handle those raging hormones.
The problem you had here was young bull elephants becoming increasingly violent. And your solution was to bring in some even bigger bull elephants. Seemed like a very bold gamble. Did you lose any sleep over it at the time?
There certainly was potential for huge disaster.
Because any disaster with an elephant is bound to be a huge disaster.
No one had ever moved elephants this big before, but last year the rangers at Kruger National Park finally had the technology. So from the same helicopter they once used for killing, they fired tranquilizer darts into older males, packed them up, and hauled them away to the Pilanesberg Park in huge trucks specifically designed for huge elephants. The sign on the side says, "We're on our way to kick butt in the Pilanesberg." Once they were established in the park, we took to the air to track some of those big bulls, brought in to teach the juveniles how to behave.
I like to think that this problem will never occur again, but we've certainly learnt a lot about elephant society as a result of studying this problem.
You didn't know that elephant society was as complex as it turned out to be?
I don't think anybody really realized just what the implications of disrupting that elephant society is.
Back on the ground, we found the first big bull who was relocated here. He was busy establishing the natural hierarchy. This sparring should discourage the youngsters from being sexually active. That means less testosterone, and that's good news for the rhinos.
It was like teenagers running on the loose.
That's right.
And all of a sudden, Dad comes home.
Suddenly he's there, and Dad is very obvious to them. And in Dad's presence, we predicted they wouldn't try and assert themselves. And
now, was it just Dad's size, or did Dad's behavior influence them?
Dad's behavior as well.
And here he comes.
Intimidating.
Is he trying to intimidate us?
Yeah, you just have a look at his... See the signals he's sending you. As soon as you start talking,
yeah,
he sways his head, brings his ears forward, he picks himself up on his shoulders.
Yeah.
He's sending you messages.
And what is the message?
He's saying, I hear you, and you're a little bit too close for my comfort. I don't like you this close.
And I'm bigger than you are, so you back off, not me.
That's right. Yeah.
I understand that message.
The Pilanesberg juveniles seem to be reading the message loud and clear. Since the big bulls arrived, not one rhino has been killed. And remember Tom Thumb? He may be the luckiest animal in the park, whether he knows it or not. Once, near the top of the wanted list, he's been given a reprieve. The arrival of the big daddies knocked him down a peg or two. He stopped harassing the rhinos, and the rangers hope that when he finally gets a chance to mate, he'll be a new man entirely.